What kind of things bring you great joy? There's a question we want to answer today. Number 2, what would a person do so that their soul, the seat of their senses and emotions, would feel proper? It would be what it should be. We'll try to answer that question today. I'm Pastor Tim Holscher. We're putting into 3 John today. 3 John is one of 5 letters written to an individual. Paul writes to Timothy twice. He writes to Titus. He writes to Philemon. And John writes to Gaius. Now, we could say Luke writes Luke and Acts, but he doesn't write them as letters. He's writing historical accounts. But these are letters. And this letter is written to a man by the name of Gaius. Now, there is another individual named Gaius, and I'm just going to say another. They could be the same individual, but I think we're going to see down in the context. This Gaius seems to be, I don't like to use the word convert, but somebody that John has shared the good news with, and he's believed, and then John has taught him or trained him. And I'm just going to suggest I think that this is a different Gaius, but we can't prove that conclusively. The elder, John refers to himself there in verse 1, could be looking at himself and is a position of leadership. This word is used frequently of those who are leaders, those who are, we call them pastors, is one of the words. The word bishop or overseer is also used, but elder looks at them of their state of maturity, spiritual maturity. So John could be referring to his spiritual maturity and his leadership that he provides to these other believers. Could be a reference to his age. He's most likely in his 90s at this time, and he looks at himself in his 90s and says, I'm older. But it could be a combination of these. But however it is, John identifies himself as the elder, and he looks at Gaius as the beloved. Now, I think John's probably making a reference to himself having this love for Gaius, but it's also possible he could be referring to Gaius as God's beloved one, because we certainly know that we have that in other texts where we're called God's beloved ones, his beloved children. John over in 1 John refers to the believers over there a couple times as beloved. So whether this is from God, which I certainly would say it is alone, or whether it also is a reference to John, that would maybe remain to be seen. But he does then say, without a doubt, whom I love in truth. In other words, it's genuine. I'm not just saying that I love you. I'm not just going through this motion. I genuinely love you, Gaius. You're somebody I care about. I've got more believers than I can count that I can say that I have a genuine love for. I enjoy being with them. I enjoy taking time with them, getting together with them. And I trust that you can say this about some believers where you are. He addresses him in verse 2 then, second sentence here, Beloved, I pray. This word that he uses for pray means to express a wish or a desire. This particular, it's a shortened form of another word that is also translated pray throughout the New Testament. But I pray or express my wish to God, would be the idea, that in all respects or in all things you may prosper and be in good health. Now, what he means by prosper, we can look at a couple passages that will illustrate this. In Romans chapter 1, Paul is stating that always in my prayers, there's that longer word for communication to God. Making requests is a word for making a request where you don't know what in this case, don't know what the outcome will be. If perchance, or perhaps now at last, by the will, if it's what God desires, I may succeed. And there it is, succeed in coming to you. So here's success in actually being able to make it to Rome. I'd like to make it to Rome, but I haven't made it yet. But I'm really hoping, I'm really asking God that maybe I can succeed in getting to Rome to see you people. So that's success there. This word prosper or success is a good way. Well, it's a good way if he can actually make it. If he could get to Rome, that would be a good way, or what we call prosperous or success. We also have in 1 Corinthians chapter 16:5, where Paul is referring to a collection that the saints were taking up, and he's telling now the Corinthian believers, giving them his advice on this, that on the first day of every week, each one of you put aside and save or treasure up as he may prosper, things might go well with him. You have not just enough to be able to take care of your needs, but maybe you have enough that you can, out of that, you can share with others that have a real need. So he says, you have this. So this would be a material prosperity. So we see this word that only occurs 3 times in the New Testament. We see it occurring in those 3 times. One time with reference to success in reaching a goal, and another one having enough material success so that you could actually help out, setting some money aside to provide for some believers that had real needs, some believers that had gone through a famine and a number of other hardships over there because they were known as believers. And so he's looking at this prosperity. And so John is able to say, he says, I wish that you may prosper and that you be in good health. We get our word hygiene from this word that he uses over here, hugiaino, hugiaino, hygiene. But that is the word that our English word comes from, is derived from. Hopefully you can maybe hear that. But that you be healthy. In other words, John says, I not only want you, and what this tells you that is when he's talking about prosper, he's talking about that things might be going well with you. You know what that's like when you write a letter to somebody and you say, hey, I hope things are going well where you are. Hope you're having a good day. Things like this. But I also hope that you're in good health. This is what John says. But he says, that he goes on, even as your soul prospers. Now your soul is the seat of your senses and your emotions. And John says Gaius' soul is prospering. This is not the same thing, but I want to look at a passage out of the book of Proverbs. This is Proverbs 17:22. It says, a joyful heart is good medicine, but a broken or a crushed or spirit that's been struck. The Hebrew word here for broken is the word nakah, to smite, to strike something. You can imagine what that's like when something has hit you really hard and it stings and it hurts. He says that spirit that's been crushed or struck so hard like that, it dries up the bones. And the word for bones here is those bones that are substantial, the substantial bones. Our body's filled with many kinds of bones, but there's certain ones that are very superstructural in terms of the weight that they carry and the jobs that they have to do. And he says that broken spirit dries it up. What he's saying is, when you have joy within your heart, it has a positive effect. Even if you're sick and going through stuff, it can have a positive effect on you. On the other hand, you in the realm of your thinking and stuff, and you're down here and you're just like, oh man. Even if you're healthy, you can feel sick. I don't know if any of you know what that's like, but sometimes when you go through hard stuff, your body might be healthy, but you're feeling sorry for yourself and you're wondering, why me? And it's like it dries up even those strong weight-bearing bones, as it were, and you're just kind of like, This isn't the same thing exactly that John is talking about, but it really provides, I think, maybe an illustration. He says, I pray that things are going well with you. I pray that you have good health, just as your soul prospers. Now, can John say that your soul is prospering? How is your emotions prospering? Because it comes to verse 3. He says, for I was overjoyed, or I greatly joyed when the brothers came and testified to your truth. And this expression, your truth, is literally the truth. That is talking about the fact that Gaius is operating in the truth. So it's you in the truth, or operating by means of the truth, even as you walk in truth. Now, the truth is that doctrine that says that there is only one true God, and only that one true God is actually able to accomplish anything of significance. We have a very big head sometimes thinking that God needs us or that we can do great things, but in reality, only God can really accomplish anything that is of any value or any worth. And we live like that as believers, going, He can do things through me, not because I'm great, but because He is the one true God. And we recognize what He's done and is doing in us. And He says, you are doing that. So Gaius, you can have this frame of mind thinking about God, and you walk in the truth. You walk focusing on this truth around you, seeing things the way God wants you to see them, rather than you see the dark underbelly of everything, or you see things in an overly optimistic way that isn't either what God wants you to say. Why would God want you to not be optimistic? Well, no, God wants you to be optimistic with regard to Him, But sometimes we have an over-optimism of what we think we can get done for God. So God wants you to have it in terms of who he is and see it that way. And he says, I rejoiced greatly. I always love this because as he says then in verse 4, I have no greater joy than this, than to hear my children walking in truth. I listen to all kinds of Christians talk about all these things that give them great joy. John's was knowing that these people that he had shared the gospel with, they had been saved, and he had trained them, taught them about what God was doing, and taught them how to rely on God. And then he hears that they're actually walking in that. He says, that's the greatest joy. And I would have to say as a pastor, having pastored for a number of years, being with people that have become my family, that, you know what? It's my greatest joy whenever they come and they share stories of what they've seen God do in their life, the opportunity God's given them, and how they watch God work. Just brings, as John says here, great joy. Now, the reason we looked at these last statements about them walking in truth and being in the truth is he says this prospers your soul. Now, your soul is where your emotions and senses are. And your soul isn't here. I'm just using this as an illustration. But your soul prospers. Its way goes well when you learn to get your thinking, your mind proper about who God is and what God's doing and learn how to be relating to that. That has a positive effect on the soul. Now, let me give an illustration from modern psychology. There are people that we would say have manic episodes. And if you don't know what manic depressives are, those are people that move between the cycle that they're going 110 miles an hour for God, and going, and they're getting stuff done. And then but they're doing it usually by their own strength, not in dependence on God, probably doing things that God hasn't really asked them to do, but they're getting it done. And then all of a sudden they crash because we're not meant to go 110 miles an hour all the time. And now they get into this state where they just can't get anything done and they just don't care. And they just feel like they're a failure. And then they cycle back the other way. And they have this cycle and they go through this. And this happens because rather than recognizing God as the one that gets it done through us, and learning to rely on him, and learning that even when we appear in our life to not be accomplishing great things for God, if God even brings one person across your path and gives you that opportunity to help or encourage or be used in whatever way in the life of one person, then that was successful. That was the thing God had for you to do. And if you do it in dependence on him with that one thing that he wanted you to do, that's great. We don't have to have 100 people. That one that God brings in our life. Just using that as an illustration. And so we're doing that, it prospers our soul. Our way goes well within our soul. And that was happening with Gaius. And so as John says, I hope things are going well with you. And I hope you're in good health, just as your soul is. Why is your soul doing well? Because he'd heard, you're walking in truth over there. And that's my greatest joy, Gaius. Thank you. Love to hear that you're really getting who God is and appreciating God and God's work. I hope that that's something that people can say about you. And if they can't right now, then you need to start recognizing who God is and what God alone can get done in your life. And rest in that, number one. Number two, I hope that you also can say that about some others that God's perhaps brought into your life and given you the opportunity to interact with. And you get to rejoice greatly, just as John did, hearing them walking in truth. With that, have a great day in the Lord, and thank you for joining me.